There are animals capable of flying in complete darkness, who eat millions of insects each night, who pollinate and disperse seeds, who've evolved to fly using little more than skin and a different design of the same bones in a human hand. These same animals might also give you the creeps. Bats are associated with a rich mythology and folklore. Unfortunately, that hasn't always been positive. People have maligned, feared, and persecuted bats for a long time, largely because we misunderstand their true nature. A second look at bats, especially with a bit of curiosity and empathy, reveals that bats certainly aren't flying diseased rodents. In fact, they aren't rodents at all. Bats are one of the most diverse groups of mammals, and they lead fascinating, if misunderstood, lives. To discuss the world of bats and bust some bat myths, I'm joined by Brian Pope, the director of the Lubee Bat Conservancy, a nonprofit dedicated to saving bats and their habitats through research, conservation, and education. Brian, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you very much for having us. And I mean, Explore has been wonderful for Lubee for the past few years, so we definitely appreciate this opportunity. Happy to bust a miss, talk bats, talk Lubee, and look forward to some Q&A with the folks out there. And I should say this too: the folks that are going to be doing the Q&A or people comment on Explore, we'd love to know where you're listening from. So if you could let us know, that would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll try to answer a few audience questions towards the end of the chat. So, like Brian said, if you have questions about bats for him, drop those in the comments as we're heading along during the broadcast today. And a helpful moderator from explore.org will send those in my direction. And we'll try to answer at least some of them towards the end of the chat. And we also have some special bat guests that we'll introduce right before then as well. So stay tuned for that. Brian, to begin though, can you tell us a little bit more about the work of Lubee and what types of bats you care for?
Yeah, so for 33 years, we've been working to save bats and their habitats through research, conservation, education, with the focus on children and community engagement. And really, our three priorities are animal care and welfare. So, animal care is kept to the highest standards with modern zoological practices and philosophies. Lubee is a certified related facility with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So, other accredited facilities include Disney's Animal Kingdom, Columbus, San Diego. So, we're talking the tops of the tops, and Lubee's very proud to be a part of that. So we make sure that we take care of our animals every day. There's always somebody here taking care of them, and we have a big enrichment for the bats. We've literally written the book whenever it comes to enrichment for fruit bats, and I'm talking articles and other things. So the bats are very well taken care of. And on our other two priorities are conservation. We've worked in over 20 countries, helped to save 25 endangered species, and our education. We reach anywhere from 30 to 40,000 people alone here in North Central Florida, and obviously you guys with Explore have given us just a fantastic global platform to reach people all over the world. So we've been doing quite a bit in those 33 years, but Mike, you just mentioned about what kind of animals do we take care of, and we have 12 species of bats here currently, and a few reptiles as well. We have some honorary bats as well. So there's a clip of one of our Malayan flying foxes, probably from one of our Explore cams that we have. And then, so we have the largest species in the world, which are the Malayan flying fox. We also have one of the most endangered species called the Rodrigues fruit bat. I'll flip through a couple quick pictures. My apologies to the folks out there if they're laminated, you can't see too well. We take these on outreach, but this is my favorite bat ever. His name's Arthur. He's a Malayan flying fox. Obviously, he's a fruit bat. Digging some of the watermelon that we have. We have our wonderful twins, Frick and Frack, which are variable flying foxes. You do see both species, females, on the Explore cameras. We have another one of our favorites who, this is Charlie. He is a native big brown bat. We actually got him from another facility. And I just mentioned one of the most endangered species, Rodrigues fruit bat. And we just funded a conservation program that's been very successful with these guys over the years. And then we have one of our honorary bats, Ned, the rescued African spurred tortoise. So we have quite the collection of animals here at Lubee, but currently 12 different species, including a few native Florida bats and some old world fruit bat species as well.
And how did you get involved in the care and conservation of bats?
Uh, you and I talked not too long ago. And Mike, you and I are both from southwestern Pennsylvania. Is that correct?
Yep,
You're
Western
from Southwest
Pennsylvania.
PA, yeah. So I went to Penn State. I was working at the Pittsburgh Zoo, and to be completely honest, I know my parents are watching too. Hello. I just wanted to go to a warmer climate. So I had actually applied at 4 different facilities, I was a reptile guy. My background's reptiles. I was a kid who flipped up every rock and caught snakes and that sort of thing. But I was always
Me
fascinated with
too.
small
My
mammals.
mother hated that.
And yeah, I mean, and I probably got bit by every one of those snakes that I tried to catch. But anyway, I found a job at Lubee, and I was really fascinated with how much conservation work they were doing. They had already had a good reputation for animal care, but I've always wanted to get involved with conservation work. So I took the leap back in 1996, and I've really been working with bats ever since. I was working at Lubee for 2 years, and then while Disney's Animal Kingdom was being built, they were actually housing some of their animals here. So I got to know the staff, and then in '98, October '98, they were going to be Lubee had loaned some of the bats to Disney, so I moved with them in '98. I was there for 10 years. I worked with all sorts of animals while I was there, but had an opportunity to come back to Lubee in 2007 as curator, and I took over as director in 2011. And I'm just extremely proud of the staff that we have, the work that we've done for 33 years, and I'm very fortunate to be a part of this organization. I absolutely love what we do here.
You definitely do some amazing work, and it's an amazing organization. And there's not a lot of conservation organizations that are dedicated specifically towards bats. There are a few, but not a whole lot. And I think maybe that's one reason why bats are a misunderstood group of animals. So for much of the rest of the chat, I think we're going to try to do some bat myth busting. And the first myth that I have on tap for everybody is a little bit about sort of like their taxonomy and their diversity, and that is bats are flying mice. So we're going to talk about that right now. The and I like that when I think about bats themselves and as a group of animals, I have to think about their biodiversity. And really, it's if I can use or borrow a line from one of the old Batman or TV shows from the 1960s. Robin probably never said this. I don't think he did, but it's like holy biodiversity, Batman. Bats are one of the most widespread and diverse groups of mammals. There's over 1,400 species of bats that have been classified right now. And to put that into context, only rodents are more numerous when we compare the number of species among different orders of mammals. With so much diversity, though, Brian, what defines a bat, and how are they different from like rodents and other mammals?
So you absolutely nailed it. There are over 1,400 species. Now, when I first started working with bats in '96, there were only about 920 species. As of right now, there are about 1,421. So we're going on 26 years. They found over 500 species of bats, which is absolutely incredible. But it is a myth that they're flying rodents, flying mice. So I have a diagram, and I love this. It's on our website, which is lubee.org, but it shows the tree of mammals and where bats fit into it. And more importantly, not only they're in their own order, which is Chiroptera it's Latin, it's Chiroptera, it's Latin for hand wing, but it shows what they're more closely related to. So I'm hoping the audience can see this. So if we're looking at this tree of mammals, hopefully that shows up pretty good. Here's bats right here. They're split up into microbats and megabats, which I think we're going to be talking about. But their closest relatives are the odd-toed parasodactyls. So you have rhinos, tapirs, and horses, which is absolutely incredible. And then we have the pangolins, which are right here. For anybody who's not familiar with pangolins, please look them up. They're absolutely getting wiped out because of poaching. And then their cousin at the top are carnivores. Cats, rats, dogs, seals. But if then we look over here, so people think the bats are flying mice, flying rodents. You can kind of see where it splits. You have rodents over here, which are actually close to primates. There's humans down there, which should kind of tell you, bats really aren't closely related to rodents at all, really, or primates. But according to this tree, which is really up to date with current information, more closely related to pangolins, carnivores, and rhinos, tapirs, and horses than they are anything else. But they are in their own order. 1,400 species, and it's the order Chiroptera, again, which is Latin for hand wing. So it's absolutely a myth that bats are flying rodents. Now, they are the only mammal capable of flight. So there are flying squirrels, sugar gliders, and then another interesting one called the colugo or flying lemur. If nobody's ever heard of them, please look them up. But bats are in their own order. They are the only mammals capable of true sustained flight.
And so we have bats, and then we have within bats a couple of different groups. What are the differences between what is considered to be like a megabat and the microbats?
So you can kind of split them up into, there's about 1,200 species, this is rough, but 1,200 species of your microbats and 200 species of your megabats. So for the most part, your megabats are your old world fruit bats. about 67 of those species are the flying foxes, and but they're all fall under the umbrella. So that right there on our Explore cameras, what people are seeing are flying foxes, but really they're old world fruit bats. So if we look at the differences, the microbats all echolocate, and it's just obviously an easier means to get around. I know we're going to talk about blindness and eyesight, and all bats can see, but microbats all echolocate. They're found all over the world, and there are some differences in reproductive physiology, little pathways, that sort of thing. But really, when it comes down to it, it's these guys echolocate, whereas the megabats, for the most part, do not echolocate. Although there are a few species that will use their tongues. They're the Rosetus bats. It's under genus Rosetus, and it's a very primitive echolocation they'll use to navigate in and out of caves. Your old world fruit bats are found in the old world. Your megabats are found in the old world. Your microbats are found worldwide. And again, your microbats are the ones that echolocate.
And then as a group, how much variance is there in the size of bats? I mean, the bats that we're most familiar with, at least I'm most familiar with in North America, are fairly small. But you're getting to see, some of these fruit bats, some of these flying foxes at your facility, and they look huge compared to like a little brown bat that I might have flying around outside. So what's the overall size difference that you can find within the groups of bats?
So if you're looking, you guys have the Explore camera up right now. That's a Malayan flying fox. By wingspan, that is the largest species in the world, and they can get up to 6 feet. I mean, that's really really big, but on average, probably about 4.5 to 5. But that's such a great shot you guys have right there, that clip. So largest species in the world by wingspan. In the Philippines, there's another species. It's got a lot of common names, but it's Ceradon jubatus. It's heavier than the Malayan flying fox, but again, the Malaysians we have at Lubee are the largest by wingspan. And then the smallest in the world is called the bumblebee bat or the Kitti's hognose bat. And that little guy is just about the size of your thumb, one of the smallest mammals in the world. So we're talking tiny to just these giant fruit bats, these flying foxes that we're very fortunate to have here at Lubee. And I think it's cool that whenever we had started talking, this is back almost 4 years ago about getting the cameras, we just thought what a really cool opportunity for people to see the largest bat in the world, how they interact and play with each other and socialize. And we've actually, people have seen them give birth and raise their young on camera. So a lot of diversity in size. Very happy that we have the largest ones here.
Yeah, watching one of them give birth last year or the year before, that was one of the most memorable live camera moments on Explore.org for me. So some really incredible stuff we've seen on the bat cams. And one thing that I know a lot of people are curious about has to do with their roosting habits. Bats, if we picture a bat in our brain and it's hanging around somewhere, it's hanging upside down. So I've met more than one person who's wondered how bats tolerate hanging upside down. For a human, if we were to hang by our feet for even a few minutes, it would become quite uncomfortable for us. So what allows bats to hang upside down for long periods of time?
Really, what it comes down to is they have locking tendons in their toes. So just like it would take effort for you to curl your toes or kind of to make a fist, it would take a bat effort to uncurl their toes because they're naturally in a locked position. And if you watch the clip right now, you can kind of see a bat walking. That bat actually just took its left leg, curled it up, and kind of wrapped herself up in it. But it looks like their knees bend backwards. They don't. It's just a way that the hips kind of push them out, rotates them out to enable them to walk like that. But really, what enables them to hang upside down are the toes that they have. And the reason that they hang upside down is if you get really close up with a bat, you look at their anatomy. There's not a lot of weight in their rear end or their legs. You can see it right there. It's just not a lot there because if they did, it would drag them down. And as we know, bats are mammals just like us. They give birth to live young. They nurse their pups. They have fur. But they really don't have a lot of weight on that back end. So if they want to fly, all they need to do is to look around. Again, they can see really well. Drop, catch air, and then they take off. So what enables them to hang upside down are the tendons in their toes. Why they do it is to be able to take flight. Now, some bats can take off from the ground, and I know we've seen that on the Explore cameras, which is really neat. And by hanging upside down, not only does it enable them to take flight, but it's also, yeah, there you go. I can make a comment about that. But it's also a means of predator avoidance. So you have snakes and raptors and certain primates that would eat them. So it's a means for them to take flight. That clip you just showed is one of our bats on the ground. So I know you guys have played a clip not too long ago. There was some great comments on there, but I can assure you that that is a bat that's on the ground. And what we do in the cool months, so we're in north central Florida. It is a pretty temperate climate. I mean, it's beautiful here. But in the wintertime, it gets really cool. So what we do is we plant ryegrass in the pens in the cooler months because ryegrass grows better at that time, and the bats absolutely love it. And then once the warmer months come, we'll go ahead and till the pens up and put in tiff leaf millet. But there are a lot of different foods that our bats like. We have a lot of different enrichment devices for them, but this seems to be one of their more favorable ones. Is just go down to the ground and munch on some grass and go back up, interact with their friends, and just spend a good night interacting with each other in a very enriching environment. Every one of those enclosures is 1,100 square feet, so it's pretty big. But I'm glad you guys played that, and I can assure the folks out there that is a bat on the ground eating grass.
And with all that information, I think we can conclusively state that bats are their own thing. They're
Oh,
not
they
flying
are.
rodents. So this myth is
There you
definitely
go.
false. And our
Yes.
next myth concerns the eyesight and navigational abilities of
Mm-hmm.
bats. And this one is bats are blind and can get tangled in your hair. Now, I actually did talk to somebody, Brian, once who said a bat got caught in her hair. So it probably has happened at some point in time. I mean, there's a lot of people in the world. There are a lot of bats in the world. Hopefully, we can get bat numbers back up to have even more bats because some of their numbers are down in a lot of different species. Uh, but bats aren't blind. We'll talk about that before we get to their navigational abilities. So their reliance on eyesight it varies quite a bit depending on the different species or group of bats. So which
Right.
types of bats are most reliant on their eyes?
So it would be the mega bats, the old world fruit bats, are the ones that aren't echolocating. They're going by smell. They're going by sight. Not so much hearing because they pretty much eat fruits. They're not going to hear the fruit. So they have really big eyes that they use whenever they're out in the evenings and at night foraging for different fruits. So those bats will not. Those guys have great eyesight. But then you have your microbats, so your 1,200-ish species. And even though they have eyes and they can see, they're out at night and they're hunting and they're foraging and they're flying into these really tight areas. And echolocation is just a better means for them to get around. And that's how they're able to navigate. And if you wouldn't mind, one of the things that Lubee does, I'm just going to put something up here. It's another one of my little props that I have. But we do echolocation call analysis where we set up a microphone. We listen for bat echolocation calls, then we download them and it's sent back to us. And I think this is really cool. Obviously, I love bats. Got my great bat fisher. I mean, I love what I do. But what people ask, why bats? What fascinates you about bats? And I'm hoping you guys can see this. Whenever we uh, do the echolocation call analysis, once it's cleaned up by the server, we get these 1.7-second blocks sent back to us. And what we're doing is we're looking at the shape of the calls and then the frequency of the calls. So this is a Mexican free-tailed bat. They're extremely common here in the southeast. And honestly, with a warming climate, they're actually going a little further north. They're insect eaters. Very common. We see these guys in a lot of our bat houses. But real quick, I think this is amazing. So I know that if I can see a call and it's got like a good punch on the end of it or on the tip of it, and it kind of trails down. I know, nice straight line, punch, a little hook at the end, within about 17 to 27 kilohertz. I know that that is a Mexican free-tailed bat. What's fascinating about this bat is calling in two different octaves at the same time. Right here, that bat is talking to the other bats that it's navigating with. Here, let me go right here. And then here, this call, boom, that's a feeding buzz, and that's whenever insect got called. Now you have to consider this is a bat. I mean, their bodies are about that big. So not only are they flying at night, they're echolocating, they're searching, calling in two different octaves, talking to their friends, hunting, all in real time, all where they're going. And you're talking a bat that's about that big, and their skulls, all in a little brain, all in a little skull. Hopefully you guys can see that. You can see how that compares to my finger. All in a little skull that big and a brain that big. They are, I don't, they're just fascinating animals with how intelligent they are. And maybe they just don't get enough credit. We know that obviously there's a lot of myths associated with them, but to echolocate like that and to call and talk with their friends all on a frequency we can't hear. And when we set these microphones up, we might get 500 calls a night. We might get 35,000. It could be the same bat flying in front of the microphone. I don't know, but it's just there's a whole world around us that we don't even know exists, and it's just amazing to me to get that kind of information and to see what we find. And we've looked for endangered species, the Florida bonnet bat with those calls. What other ones are here in Florida? So it's obviously they're echolocating. It's a means of navigating, but to really see it, what does it look like? How does it sound? Is absolutely amazing.
That is quite amazing. I didn't actually know that they had that ability to multitask. I know the joke is, can you walk and chew gum at the same time? And some people
Mm-hmm.
can't. But imagine being a bat and doing all of those things at the same time. That is quite incredible. And
A
I'm
lot going
wondering,
on.
Right, right. I'm wondering about, the how sensitive and precise echolocation is. And I always think back to when I was a ranger at Carlsbad Cavern National Park, and it's actually been almost 20 years now since I was a ranger there. So I can't believe how long it's been. But in the deepest part of the cave, there's a small colony of about 100 fringed myotis bats. They roost at Lake of the Clouds, and that's more than a mile of passageway underground that they have to navigate to get into the cave and
Jeez.
out to the roosting spot. And it's
Hmm.
about 1,000 feet underground. So, uh, can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on how bats are able to utilize echolocation not only for navigational abilities to move through caverns, but also to move through forests at night and to locate their insect prey, which sometimes can be extremely small.
Yeah, really, the general train of thought is that you could put up a human hair, and they've done this experiment, and the bats can go around it, and that's how sensitive their echolocation is. And what they're doing is just sonar. They're calling, it's coming back to them. But what's pretty neat is that there are certain bat species. There, the diversity of bats and just the morphological facial structures are amazing. So if you look at, especially the bats that echolocate, some of them are echolocating out of their mouth, and then it comes back into just, I guess, proportional ears. Then you have other bats with these big sword noses that they're echolocating out of their nose, and they're moving their nose around that fleshy tip to pinpoint echolocations. Then they have huge ears and huge tragus, which is our inner structure. But really, echolocation is just a means of navigation. How can they get around? It's bouncing off of objects. It's extremely sensitive. They know the difference between a human hair, an insect, a tree, a cave wall. It is. They are so evolutionarily sophisticated. It's ridiculous. That's why I love showing that image that I have, just so people can see, like, okay, they're not just these mindless flying mice around. That they're extremely smart. They're extremely social. But their echolocation abilities is just unmatched when it comes in the scientific world.
Incredible. So yeah, when we talk about the myth, our bats are blind and can get tangled in your hair. This is definitely false as well. So one of the
Correct.
again most agile animals I think I can or mammals I can think of are the bats, and their ability to navigate in complete darkness too is really wild. If no one's ever been in a if you're thinking about trying to walk around in complete darkness, it's impossible for a human to do. Um, if no one's been in a cave, and if you haven't experienced, and Brian, maybe you've done this, you've been into a cave, gone to into a place where there's absolutely no light. It's a complete absence of light. Your eyes will never adjust. It's just not like hanging out in a dark bedroom or a dark basement where maybe you're going to make out some shapes and things like that. It is a otherworldly experience, and to think about bats being able to navigate in those conditions, it's really just amazing.
Well, I can say growing up as a Cub Scout and then a Boy Scout and going up to Eagle, and my father was a part of that, and going into caves. You know what the caves are like in southwestern PA. Man, I've had to crawl through holes to get into them, but unless somebody's there at the other end with that light, you can't see anything. But the bats are navigating right out of that hole, no problem. And we've done some work where uh, people were wondering, curious if they had bats around their homes. So we would just go to see if the bats were there. And there was this one in particular where there was a woman in a huge subdivision. She was the only one with brick columns, and the brick columns were about the top of them were about 6 inches off the soffit. And inside of that, somebody didn't patch enough concrete, and there was a hole about a half inch by an inch. And inside of there were 100 bats living in that column. How did one bat find that? That it had to go in between those 6 inches, find that hole, and then tell its friends, this is a really great place to live. You guys got to come check it out. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing that one of them either landed or echolocated and found it. And that was just a perfect hole for them. That was just a perfect roost area for those bats. And she had about 100 living in there, which is incredible.
And our next myth concerns bat foods. I think if we had like a family feud style survey and we asked just a bunch of random people what bats ate, a good number of them would say blood. And there's some truth to this, but the real answer is in the details. So, Brian, let's talk about vampirism in bats. What bats drink blood, and where are those bats found?
Okay, so there are three species of vampire bats, and actually, I have these are all replica skulls, by the way. These aren't real. I'll just flash this real quick. This is a common vampire bat. Again, these are made out of plastic, but you can kind of see the size of the skull with my finger. They're just tiny little things. But there is the common vampire bat, the white-winged, and the hairy-legged vampire bat. They're all found in Mexico, Central, and South America. And right now, 1,421 species of bats, three species of vampire bats, just tiny, pretty incredible watching them with that clip right there. You can see those bats walking around. They do crawl around on the ground like that. They're one of only a few species of bats to do that, but they do exclusively feed on blood. But again, 3 species out of over 1,400 that does so. And there has actually been some research done with the anticoagulant found in their saliva and how that would interact with when it comes to blockages in human circulatory systems, heart attack and stroke patients. But what's neat is they don't just bite down on them. They actually use sharpened incisors, so not the canines, sharpened incisors. They got little heat sensors on their nose. They're such a cute little bat. But they'll fly down to, let's just say, a cow. And unfortunately, I should say that they're clearing the rainforests in Central South America, especially South America. They're putting a lot of cattle pastures, a lot of cattle there, so common vampire bats numbers are actually increasing. But they have these little heat sensors. They'll fly next to that animal that's sleeping, kind of find out where the blood vessels closest to the skin. They got an anesthetic in their saliva. They'll kind of lick it, numb a little bit, make a little slice, lap that blood up, and with that anticoagulant in their saliva, it'll kind of keep the blood flowing a little bit and then fly off. But one of the things about vampire bats is they're extremely social. So if there's a member of that colony, that's such cool footage. If there's a member of the colony that didn't get anything to eat, another bat in the colony doesn't have to even be related, will regurgitate some of that blood to feed the other colony member so that they can make it until their next meal. So very, very social animals, and it's neat to see how their societies, their colonies work.
Yeah, we certainly wouldn't. I don't think many of us would associate altruism with bats, but that's a great example of it within that group. And when we're thinking about North American bats, most of those feed primarily on insects. When we consider bats across the world, though, it's just not insects, and it's just not those few bats that eat blood. But what is the true diversity of the diet of bats as we consider like the whole order Chiroptera? What does that include?
So about 70% of global bat species are going to eat insects. About 20% are going to eat fruit, flowers, nectar, leaves. But then you have your vampire bats. There are some species that will actually fish. The bulldog bat is one of them. It has a huge wing membrane between its legs, so it'll echolocate and skim some fish right underneath the surface. Pallid bats in the southern southwestern United States will eat a lot of scorpions and beetles. They glean off of the ground. And then there are some wicked bats out there, some really cool ones that are carnivorous. So we're not talking vampires. We're talking carnivorous bat species. And one of them is false vampire bats, Vampirum spectrum. I hope I got the common name right. But it's one of the rare bat species. I think there's only 5 species where you have a monogamous couple, and then they give birth, and then those bats will grow up, but also help the parents, which is pretty neat. But they'll eat everything from different bird species to reptiles, small mammals, and even other bat species. And you can always find a roost of the Vampirum spectrum because there might be some wings down below. But so, I mean, you're talking every ecological food niche they have basically covered. And there's other species out there that'll really only eat frogs, or frogs make up a significant part of their diet, but they only eat the male frogs. You know why?
No, I don't.
They're the ones making noise. So while the females are sitting back, waiting, for the other males, and males are making noise, and the bats are pinpointing and going after them. So, but they've really every ecological food niche you can imagine, from carnivorous to sanguivores, your vampire bats, to your frugivorous, insectivorous. They've pretty much covered the spectrum, and they live all over the world except for the high Arctic. Although there are some bat species live in Alaska, to Antarctica, some really desert areas where there's really not a lot of life. And also some islands they just couldn't get to. Basically, everything else, where there's land, there's going to find a bat, which is incredible.
Huge diversity in diet. So yes, another myth that we can bust is that bats don't commonly drink blood except for some very few species. And if you find a bat, though, I think sometimes people will think, well, maybe this is just a bit of bad luck, or oh no, I'm going to be exposed to to diseases and things like that. We'll talk specifically about diseases a little bit later on. But this next myth is more or less just kind of like the premise is that bats are bad luck, and they're just useless creatures at all. So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about like the ecological role of bats, and we have mentioned a lot of those things in this regard during the chat so far. Bats, in my opinion, they really do fill special niches in terrestrial ecosystems worldwide. So how does their presence enhance diversity, especially when you're talking about like the behavior of fruit bats and pollinating bats. Bats that aren't solely eating insects.
Oh, one of the things that we say are bats are one of the most important mammals to humans. They are essential for ecosystem services. They're also essential for agricultural services. So if we're specifically talking about your fruit bats and your nectarivorous bats, anything from the huge baobab trees that are in Africa and Madagascar, bats are some of the primary pollinators of those. There's a lot of agricultural crops that depend on bats as well, everything from mango and cashews to even agave, which is where we get tequila. Bats are the ones that are pollinating a lot of those flowers and other fruits such as durian, peaches, plums. I mean, there's just a plethora of agricultural crops that we depend on for bats to either spread the seeds or to pollinate the flowers. And one of the other things, they've done numerous studies in Central and South America, and then also in Southeast Asia. Some examples like the Krakatau, some of the islands that have had volcanoes erupt, kind of wipe a lot of the life out. And what are the first ones that came back? And a lot of the first plants were bat dispersed seeds. They've done studies that show that in a lot of these areas that are the rainforests that are getting clear cut, about 90 to 95% of the first plants, trees, whatever that's coming up are bat dispersed seeds. So not only are they important for the regeneration of forests, but they're extremely important to humans whenever it comes to agricultural services and a lot of the crops that we depend on, even some lumber products, as well as fruits, and even whenever you're talking cactus in the American Southwest and other areas, bats are the ones that are pollinating these flowers. So they're extremely important, not only to ecosystems, but to humans as well.
Right. When we talk about ecosystem services, we can think about, of course, or talk about the relationship between bats and insects as well. So how are bats affecting insect populations?
One of the best studies that came out to really answer that question, it was a 2011 U.S. Geological Survey study that showed that bats in the United States farmers anywhere from 20 to 53 billion dollars a year annually by eating agricultural pests and reducing the need for insecticides. And you just look at Texas alone. One of the main insects, I should say, is the corn earworm moth. So they're eating the moth. They're not eating the larva, but the larvae are the ones that are doing damage to a lot of the agricultural crops. I mean, everything from corn, cotton. There's other agricultural pests that are eating tomatoes, watermelon, you name it. We're actually putting it together right now because we install bat houses where I want to send it out to local farmers, especially organic farmers around here in North Central Florida. And it's just a list of, okay, these are the species we find in our bat houses. These are the insects that they eat, and these are the crops that these insects eat. And it's amazing just looking at it right here in North Central Florida, the number of agricultural pests we have and that bats eat them. So whenever it comes to insects, they're the number one consumer of nocturnal insects. And a lot of those are biting insects as well. So you got mosquitoes, whenever it comes to pests that'll bite your horses, flies, your domestic animals at night. Bats are eating those. So they're extremely important, not only to get rid of annoying insects that are biting us at night and our pets and our livestock, but they are eating a lot of the agricultural pests as well. That study from USGS, I implore anybody to look it up. 2011 USGS studies, just so you can see the sheer number that they feel that bats are saving farmers here in the United States by eating those pests and reducing the need for pesticides.
All right. Well, bats certainly aren't bad luck then, and they're certainly not useless creatures. So this myth is also busted. In fact, an ecosystem rich with bats is likely a healthy eco. Our second to last myth concerns bats and disease, and this is namely that bats are commonly rabid. And Brian, rabies is a disease that's transmissible between all different types of mammals. But just how often do bats contract rabies, and just how common is it really among bats overall?
Well, the percentage that usually is out there is less than a tenth to half a percentage of bats actually have rabies. And you hear a lot more stories about foxes and skunks, raccoons, dogs, and than we do about bats. But bats, anything associated with bats, and like we probably talk about that too, gets sensationalized whenever there's not really a lot of truth or facts behind it. But really, when it comes down to it, most mammals can get rabies. Our dogs can get it. We can get it. Bats can get it, but they don't just have rabies. They don't just have disease. And they're extremely clean animals. As anyone who's watched the Explore cameras, watched our bats, they're constantly grooming themselves, constantly cleaning themselves. These bats aren't flying around spreading disease, because if that was the case, well, we'd be in some trouble because that we kind of have bats all around us depending on where you live. So it's absolutely a myth that bats are rabid and just carrying around these diseases. They do not. And in fact, whenever if a bat were to acquire rabies, they're so small, especially if we're talking about the ones here in the United States. They're so small that it runs through them so quickly, and they die. But I need to say that if anybody does find a bat on the ground, or really any wildlife, do not touch it. If you're a child, get your parent, call animal control, call a wildlife specialist. Let's leave wild animals alone. But Mike, it's just not true that they have rabies and that they're spreading these diseases.
And we also, heard a lot of, well, anti-bat sentiment during the last few years. Uh, I think that swelled during the initial waves of the coronavirus pandemic. So, what do we know about bats and SARS-CoV-2? And that's the virus that emerged in humans in late 2019 and soon spread around the world.
Well, we can say again, I just said this, I'll reiterate it. We've been living with bats for generations, for thousands of years, and we haven't had a lot of issues. So I'm just going to throw out some numbers at you. I'll try to make this quick. Bats are not spreading SARS-CoV-2. They're not. They're not. A lot of that information came from a specimen they got from an intermediate horseshoe bat. I believe it was a 2013 sample or it was a 2003 sample. It's an intermediate horseshoe bat, lives out in Asia. They found a virus called RATG13, which is 96.3% similar to SARS-CoV-2. But we're talking apples and oranges here. If you compare us to chimps, we're talking, I think it's about 98.6. That virus, RATG13, also cannot turn into SARS-CoV-2. So bats are not out there spreading SARS-CoV-2. I am familiar with some research that was done. The specific institute in Germany, I can't remember, but they had a very small control group of 9 Egyptian fruit bats. They had given it into the nose. Don't quite quote me on this, but I'm just going to give you the information, the basic information. They found out only one of the 9 bats actually got that virus, and they didn't spread it to the other ones. Whereas I think it was ferrets or minks, all of them got it, and they can spread it, and I don't believe anything happened with chickens or pigs. Now, the other one that they did, this was in the National Wildlife Health Center up in Madison, Wisconsin. They had a small group of big brown bats, okay? And they had given them the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And the bats didn't seroconvert. They didn't test positive because the virus just did not link with them. Big brown bats are literally the most common bat we have here in North America. They're the most widespread, and they just can't get it. There was another study done by UC Davis. It was a paper that was published where they looked at 400 species, mostly mammals, and they were looking at the morphology of the ACE2 receptors in the lungs. So the virus, SARS-CoV-2, binds with our ACE2 receptors in our lungs. From known morphology, they wanted to see which animals were high risk for that virus. And it was a lot of carnivores, which we've seen in some zoos, humans, primates, that sort of thing. Every bat species that we looked at was either low or very low. They just, from what we know, from what the preliminary studies have shown, they just can't get it. They're not spreading it. Meanwhile, in Iowa, some of these hunter tagged deer that are coming in, like 40% of the population had it. So bats, we may never know the origin, but we do know that the one virus that was closest that came from the intermediate horseshoe bat is not nearly the same thing as SARS-CoV-2. It cannot convert or mutate into SARS-CoV-2. Bats did not cause this, whether it came from a civet or a genet or a pangolin. We don't know. So we can't be spreading blame. Wherever it came from, we don't know, but we cannot be persecuting bats. There are horrible stories about bats being burned, entombed, shot. Bats are not to blame. Humans are to blame. Encroachment's to blame. Having these wildlife markets where animals are stacked on top of each other are to blame. Bats and other wildlife are not to blame. We have been living with them for thousands of years. They're absolutely wonderful animals. And I hope if anybody takes anything out of this talk that you and I are having, Mike, is that bats are wonderful, wonderful animals that we're very lucky to have around. They do essential services for the agriculture, for the economy, and also for ecosystems as well.
Yeah, so I think, the main takeaway, certainly when we're talking about bats and diseases, they need habitat, they need space, and as long as we give them that, and we kind of separate ourselves from bats, then there's not really a worry about rabies, for instance. So are bats commonly rabid? Certainly not. So this is also another false myth. And the last myth that we'll discuss is one that you don't really hear people say out loud, or at least I don't hear it, but it's often implied through our attitudes toward bats. And going, back to what you were saying, I think just a moment ago, with persecution, this myth is bats don't deserve our attention or care. And we have been seeing over the last several decades. Certainly, it's not limited to bats, but biodiversity on the planet is declining. A lot of species are going extinct. So while some bat populations are stable and healthy, other species are not doing so well. So what are the greatest threats to bats worldwide, or even locally in the United States?
Worldwide, it would be habitat destruction. I just saw a study the other day that basically they're saying that the Amazon's on the tipping point because there's been so much deforestation. It's not only affecting bats but other species. But habitat destruction is the number one problem for bats and a lot of other species. Uncontrolled hunting, and you have to remember there are certain cultures out there that eat bats, but it's the poachers that come in, uncontrolled, over hunting, unregulated hunting that's just wiping out these species. I mean, there's certain species that have been hunted to extinction. Inaction is another one. One story is the Christmas Island pipistrelle, where there just wasn't enough done to try to save these because bats don't really, they're not the big charismatics. They're not the tigers or the lions or the elephants, but they're just as important. Their ecosystem services, and we just talked about them, is really unrivaled. So overhunting, habitat destruction, inaction, no legal protection for them is another one. Myths, which we're getting the bus right now, which is pretty cool. So hopefully we get a global audience and we can talk about some of those things. But if we want to talk about here in the United States, one of the major threats is white nose syndrome. And for the folks out there that might not be familiar with it, go ahead and just Google white nose syndrome. That is a fungus that came over by humans from Europe, and our bats did not have an immunity to it. They found it in a cave in New York in 2006, and that has spread to, I believe, 37 states, if not 39, 37 states, and 7 Canadian provinces. And what that fungus does, it only affects bats, but it essentially wakes them up whenever they're hibernating. And you can see the fungus. It's white nose, it's there, but it's also on their wings. So whenever they're hibernating, this fungus irritates them. They wake up, they're cold, they're hungry, they depleted their energy, their fat reserves. So they may fly out and they're either going to starve to death or they're going to freeze to death. And the latest numbers, I believe, between 7 and 8 million bats have been affected by this. So we always tell people, a lot of the spelunkers and folks that like to go cave exploring, just like you and I did, just follow the cave, the rules that are at the cave, decontaminate, just whatever the cave rules say, please follow that. But it also affects certain species, different species differently, I should say. Little brown bats, where you and I are from and found in over North America, it's a 98 to 100% mortality rate. Big brown bats, it's about 20 to 40, but there's quite a few species that it's hit really, really hard, and it affects bats that go into a true hibernation. Some bats migrate out, like your tree bats, your northern yellow, your eastern red bats. We haven't seen it here in Florida yet, but there is the Florida Bat Working Group and FWC and other biologists who are out there studying these caves, looking for that fungus. But it has had a devastating impact because the bats just had no immunity to it. So threats go from everything from diseases that were brought over by humans, not intentional, obviously, to habitat destruction, overhunting, inaction, and just really no protection for these animals. And as you and I just talked about, there are some of those important animals out there for humans. So Lubee's every day doing awareness campaigns and conservation and trying to make a difference because it's absolutely essential. Not only do we have our wonderful bats here, people get to see and become aware of them, but it's important to get involved in conservation work and education as well.
Yeah, it is the white nose syndrome is a distressing story. I was reading about how recently as like the mid 2000s, millions of little brown bats inhabited the continent, and now there's the let's see, according to my notes, the International Union for Conservation of Nature now considers them to be an endangered species. So that's happened really only within less than the last, maybe 15 years or so.
I will say that there are some good stories out there. They're finding these bats and Indiana bats and other species in caves where they have been living with the fungus, and they're finding that individuals they got more muscle on them, they got more fat on them, and they are surviving it. I don't know if we're ever going to see numbers in our lifetime, but there are success stories out there that there is some immunity that is building. So we are seeing some successes out there. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are a lot of good stories out there, conservation stories and good work folks are doing, but it's still spreading across the U.S. But there is some good news out there.
Well, good. Yeah, that was actually the next question that I had in my list here. Is there hope? So I'm really glad to hear that we are seeing some bats with some immunity to
A little
that
bit, but
disease.
we'll take it.
And yeah, I know we're going to get to audience questions specifically in a little bit, and we're going to introduce some of the bats that you have with you in just a little bit, Brian. But somebody was wondering, and this is a question that I also had for you. Somebody was wondering about bat boxes and what somebody was wondering, are there suggestions about how to attract bats using bat boxes? And if you're not familiar with bat boxes, I actually have one here. This is one that I intended. Let me see, get it in front of the camera here. This is one that I had actually intended to put in my yard, and I haven't done it yet, just because I haven't figured out the best spot for it. It has some plywood inside for that's rough for the bats to easily hang on. So this would obviously be for a very small colony of bats. But Brian, if somebody's looking to make their homes or their neighborhoods better for bats, I know bat boxes are one option for them. So what sort of tips could you provide for someone like me who's looking to put up a bat box? Where could it be sited, and any other considerations that we should think about before we tack it onto the side of a building or something like that?
Well, one of the things I want to point out first is that house has 3 chambers in it, which is great. Bigger houses that have more than one chamber do a lot better than just kind of the small one. So if you, 3 or 4 chambers is fantastic. The other thing is that house was black, which is great if you're going to be in a northern climate. I know whenever I went to Penn State, we had the houses facing east and they were black. Here in Florida, what we do is ours are stained medium brown color and we face them southeast. You think about it, in the northern climates, whenever the sun's in the south in the winter, those bats are out of their house and they're hibernating. So in a northern climate, you either want it to be a darker brown or a black, mostly facing east. In a southern warmer climate, facing southeast, about a medium brown color. The other thing is bat houses do not do well in trees. Too much shade, obstructions, and predator access. We have a lot of rat snakes here in Florida, and they'll climb trees and go after the bats. So either on the side of the building, although keep in mind there's going to be some staining with guano and urine, or on a standalone post. Friday, myself and one of our staff members, Tim, are actually putting up our 106th and 107th bat house. And when we do these, we always face them southeast, 20 feet in the air, at least 20 feet from a tree line, and we like to be within about a half mile of a water source. And that seems to work best for us. So again, multiple chambers, 3 to 4, up 20 feet, although minimum 12 is fine. Your staining depends on your climate. We do a medium brown here facing southeast, 20 feet from a tree line. And really to attract bats, you can't put guano in there. You can't get bats. You can't do it anyway because it's not legal. But the best thing you can do for a successful bat house is to build a bat house or get one that's really well made and put it in the right location. Those are really the only things you can do. If you're near a water source, that's great. Keep them away from a tree line. And you go to our website, lubee.org, there's some information there as well. But there are different tips and tricks you can do. But really, you can't do anything to attract them outside of building a really, really good bat house and putting it in the right location.
And bat boxes are only one way to support bat conservation, but they're not, right for everybody. They're not suitable for all locations. So
Right.
what are some of the other ways that people can help support bats across the landscape, including on, maybe the international scale?
One of the things we do is to put in back gardens. So plants in that will bloom at night that insects come in, and bats will be attracted to those. So a night blooming jasmine is one of them. I think moonflower is another one. So you could just Google. There's a bunch of different plants that people can out that would they could put out in their garden that would attract bats. Another thing is, and again, keep safety in mind. But here in Florida, we have a lot of palm trees, and if you have palm fronds that are hanging down and they're not a safety hazard, they're not going to drop on any property or any person, leave those palm fronds because northern yellow bats like to roost them. If you have some dead trees on your property, also called snags, with some hollows in it, as long as it's safe, not going to hurt person or property, leave those snags. They're great for not only bats, but woodpeckers and other animals. But really, if you really want to protect bats, it's really about education awareness. Learn about them, spread the information with your friends and your family, get involved with volunteer groups that may be doing some wildlife surveys, support organizations like Lubee, because there are a lot of good folks out there doing work. But really what it comes down to, Mike, is education and awareness, realizing how important these animals really are.
So bats lead fascinating lives, and they fulfill invaluable roles in terrestrial ecosystems. And I think the myth that we need not care about them or their conservation, that is certainly false. So that is the last bat myth that we're looking to bust during this live broadcast today. But we did want to take some time to not only answer audience questions, but Brian, I know you wanted to introduce us to a couple of individual bats that you have nearby. And I know that there's some protocols that you have to go through um,
Yep.
to to do that as well. So can you talk about a little bit about why you might want to put a mask on during these
Yeah, we
situations?
just want to make sure that we're protecting our bats. I mean, any zoo out there that is working with animals, whether it's bats or whether we're still wearing masks. We still don't really know how this is going to affect them. So I implore anybody that's working with bats, you should definitely be working. There he is. You should be wearing masks and gloves. That's just the protocol right now. This little guy, I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to move the camera. This is Sunny. So this is a little golden mantled flying fox. Hey, buddy. That he was in here the other day. This bat eats fruit. This is not where Sonny lives. I do have to point that out. This is just his little container. Whenever we would take him on outreaches to introduce him to kids, we bring him up for Zooms like this. We like to have Sonny in there, and that's how bats go to the bathroom. So if anybody ever wondered, Sonny never fails to put on a show. That's how they do it. By the way, he held on with his thumbs because all their wings are just a really large hand. But this is Sonny. He's our little golden mantled flying fox, and it looks like he was chowing down on some cantaloupe pieces that were down there. But we were talking about the differences between megabats and microbats. This is a megabat, even though he's not really big. Again, this is a little golden mantled flying fox from the Philippines, and at one point they thought they were endangered, but really what it was is they just hide really, really well. So this is one of our favorite bats here, Sonny. He's absolutely wonderful. We love showing him off because he's such a cute little guy. But that's Sonny. All right, buddy. And again, Sonny, this is not where Sonny lives. Sonny is in an 1,100 square foot enclosure with his friends. And if you guys could get one more bat, and the next bat we're going to get is a big brown bat. And this particular bat that they're going to get, oh, Tracy has him here. This particular bat was rescued from an organization that had closed down. So we were happy to bring him in, and somebody's going to bring him over. Who do we have? Who do we have? Nicola. So this is a big brown bat. So we were talking before about big brown bats and how they're one of the most common species here in North America. So a little bit of a difference. So we'll get on Nicola here. And am I on him? Yeah, there he is right there. So that's Nicola, big brown bat, and you can see, Angela's thumb, and these are one of the larger species here in North America. So you can see they're really not that big at all. But this is an insectivorous bat. So you guys met Sonny. He's a little golden mantled flying fox from the Philippines. He's a fruit eater. And this cutie patootie right here is Nicola. He's a big brown bat, and he found all over North America, but these guys do eat insects. And we may have a little mealworm right now for him. Let's see if he'll take it or if he's going to be a little camera shy. What do you say, buddy? And that's why bats are important in the United States, because they eat insects. And we feed these guys mealworms, whereas, again, with Sonny, he gets a big fruit and vegetable salad. And we've worked with one of the top animal nutritionists in the country to make sure that these guys have the best diet possible. And they're very, very well taken care of. And the thing with these guys, too, is we give them a lot of different types of enrichment. Hey, there's his butt. We give them a lot of different types of enrichment just to keep their minds stimulated. We have different balls and ladders and toys. And the thing with bats and enrichment, they love things that make noise. They love things to take apart. So if it's a bird or a primate toy, they absolutely love it. And I know you guys got a clip on right now that was just came out in Explorer not too long ago. I know you just showed it. So the smaller bat is little golden mantled flying fox, just like Sonny. He's a neutered male. The other two bats are females. And we had a lot of enrichment balls in the exhibit that night. But it's that oh yeah, I guess I can take this off now. There was a lot of different enrichments that night in that enclosure. But it's like, I want that one. It's like you get up a bunch of little kids and all different toys, but I want that one. So this is common behavior for these guys. I mean, these guys are going to have little spats and corals, but nothing happened with these bats. They're perfectly fine. We check them every day. And it's just like my wife and I have two cats at home that are both neutered, and they still squabble and get into spats. It was the same thing with that video. I love to see the reaction that we got, that people were really happy to see it. They didn't realize that, but we have so many different types of enrichment out that night, but we wanted that one. But we're really happy that our bats live in such large enclosures, stimulating environment, that they really seem to like whatever enrichment was in there. But again, that was his name's Tyrant. He's a neutered little gold mantled flying fox, and the other two are variable flying fox. So it's blown up, so it's pretty cool that Explorer took that clip and put it out there. But I can tell you that those guys, they get along just fine. They got a little quarrel. If anybody thinks anything bad happened, well, they just need to pay a little bit more attention to that behavior.
I was wondering, yeah, just one quick question before we get to some audience questions. I was wondering if the individuality that each bat can show, if that poses any particular challenges. Like, do you find any of the bats have challenging personalities, and maybe you'll need to pay attention to that one more than another, or some are kind of more laid back and they get along with everybody?
Well, the good thing about these guys is they're all pretty laid back. We don't really have any overtly aggressive bats. We just don't. Whether it's intact males that, because we do breed bats here. I mean, you guys got to see them giving live birth, or it's bats that were neutered or older or younger. For the most part, they really seem to get along. I mean, we always have the explore cameras on. People get to see them socializing and interacting and playing around with each other, and they just pretty much, for the most part, have laid back personalities. There's not really any individuals where we say, okay, we can't have this one with this bat because they don't get along. It's just not really an issue. But the thing with Lubee is we give our animals a lot of space. There are certain rules by the AZA Bat Taxon Advisor Group, space requirements, which are amazing. Lubee actually goes even a little bit higher than that. So we make sure that our bats, and you guys seen them on Explore, they can fly around the enclosures, they can get away from each other if they'd like to. But we also hang up a lot of enrichment, whether it's food enrichment, but we also have things with different scents, tactile, little teddy bears for them. So there's plenty for them to do to keep their minds stimulated. But really, it's not really an issue for us. That's one of the looks like that's a pumpkin stuffed with celery and some other things that the bats are enjoying. So I mean, we're very happy that we have the resources to be able to give them so many different types of enrichment. We like to see what these guys enjoy, but again, you can put up 10 pieces of enrichment, but there's one that everybody seems to go after, and that one clip, they seem to really like that ball. But everybody was fine, nothing happened. That is absolutely typical bat behavior you'd see in a place like Lubee. You'd see in Disney's Animal Kingdom where there are bats. You'd see out in the wild.
Well, I'm sure I could ask you many more questions about bats, but I know our audience did have some questions for you,
Sure.
and I want to try to give them the opportunity to get their questions answered specifically before we conclude the chat today. So I know one person was wondering about how bats came to Lubee. Specifically, this person writes, "How is it that the bats came to Lubee, and about how long do they stay there? Are you transporting them to other places, or is this for some bats their forever home?"
So the bats that are at Lubee, there were initially bats brought in 1990, and then it depends on the species. There were some random species, especially like sunnies, which is a little golden mantle flying fox, that they were at certain zoos. They couldn't house them anymore, so they brought them in. So they're originally bats that were brought in from the wild in 1990, but we've had very strictly controlled breeding programs where we know the genetics on these bats, so we can say, okay, we can put this male with this group of females to maintain high genetic diversity. So again, 30 some years ago, they were brought in from the wild, but we bring bats in from other zoos that are maybe just looking to close that exhibit down, and maybe the bats didn't have anywhere to go. Bats that were injured and needed forever homes, and or we breed them here. Now, where it comes to where do the bats go? They either stay here, or if we find another AZA accredited facility, again, we have bats in Columbus, we have bats at Disney's Animal Kingdom. As long as they have really good, we have this very long, extensive questionnaire. If we know the bats are going to be very well taken care of, we make sure we will send the bats there on loan, or maybe the bats are going to be there permanently. But if we do loan those bats out, we always follow the AZA ethics whenever it comes to acquisitions and then transferring animals, and very extensive questionnaire to make sure that the bats are going to be taken care of. We only send them to AZA accredited facilities. Or again, they stay here. It just depends on the situation. But most of the bats here were either born here, brought in from our other zoos, or just were rescued because they needed forever homes.
And sometimes bats get in people's houses. I know it happened to me when growing up in Western Pennsylvania. I can remember several instances where we had bats flying around in our house, and it was always kind of like a difficult thing for us, at least, to try to get them outside. So, and I bring this up because that's a question that somebody's wondering. Somebody was wondering, how do you safely trap and release a bat that has gotten into your home?
Best thing you can do is to close it in one room and open up the door, because that way the bat will find their way out. If that's not an option, you absolutely have to. What we suggest is you can call an animal expert, call an animal or like a wildlife expert to help you out. Or if you want to take it upon yourself, you got to be extremely careful. So you can wear gloves, wear thick gloves. You can get a cardboard box and get some kind of sturdy backing that you can put behind that. Get the bat in the box, put it outside, and let it go. Safety first, always wear gloves, or I should say, call an expert first. If you can't open the door, open the window and get that bat out, call an expert. But if you do it yourself, please wear gloves, please be safe. Put a box over it, some kind of sturdy backing, and set it outside.
And we did talk about bat houses, and the bat house that I showed as an example was a rectangular design. Somebody was wondering about purchasing a bat house that maybe has 360-degree access. I know you see that for sale online with some bat conservation groups. I think they maybe nicknamed rocket boxes and things like that. So somebody was wondering,
Yep.
Should I have a bat house that has 360 degrees of access?
Yeah, so we've done a couple things. One, we've put bat houses. Again, we're always facing the southeast, but there's been times whenever we've mounted bat houses on the back. And what the good thing about that is it can give the bats access. So if it does get maybe too hot there, they can go into the other side of it to cool off. Now that's putting bat houses back to back. Whenever it comes to rocket style houses, honestly, I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I will say this. One of our past interns, who's now one of our employees here, we love her, her name's Patty. Her intern project was actually to build a rocket style bat house. So we have 7 bat houses on Lubee property. Whenever we started making bat houses, we want to make sure we got it right. So we did all different designs, shapes, all that sort of thing. And actually right now we have between 3,000 and 4,000 bats in between a 4x4 small single chamber, although there's not really a lot in there. They're like the bigger ones. But Patty's bat house actually got bats in it. And again, I didn't really have much experience with it. We did some research, saw some of the other organizations out there who make really good bat houses, and we had good luck with that rocket style. So I don't see why not. If they want to be on the front side of that, the side that's going to be getting a lot of sun, they want to cool off, they can just go in the back. So absolutely go for it. Yes.
Well, I know we have been talking a lot about bats or all about bats for the last hour, and I think we could talk a lot longer. But I think this is a good time to conclude our broadcast. And Brian, it's been a fascinating conversation with you. I'm glad you've been able to take the time to answer our questions, my questions, and audience questions. I know the audience had several more questions, so maybe if we didn't get to those, we can get to those in the comments on the live chat channel on Explore.org, or you can go to Explore.org/bats at any time and drop a question in there. I know Lubee looks at those questions as well. So you're often in there answering questions. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
All right. Well, excellent. Bats have been an unfairly maligned group of animals for far too long, and the myths associated with them misrepresent and they really devalue one of the Earth's most diverse and valuable groups of mammals. So the bats enrich the places that they inhabit, and they demonstrate amazing abilities that are unparalleled among mammals. And Brian, thanks so much for joining me today. It was really fun chatting with you.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Explore.org, for this opportunity. We definitely appreciate it.
My guest today was Brian Pope, the director of the Lubee Bat Conservancy. Again, you can go to lubee.org if you want to learn more about their work and support their organization. And if you want to watch their bats at any time, just go to explore.org/bats. And my name is Mike Fitz with Explore.org. Thanks for joining me today. And remember, as we like to say at Explore.org, never stop learning.